The Game Awards are one of the most prestigious events in the year for the gaming industry, or at least it's self-proclaimed to be. While I do admit it has been a good deal of fun watching the Game Awards year after year, I'll still absolutely agree with anyone claiming these award shows don't matter, because it's true, they don't. It doesn't matter what Jeff says, these award shows only matter as much as the stock you put into it. And with all that said and done, I do still like getting into conversations, sometimes more accurately arguments, about what games deserve recognition. I'm only human, but I think too many of us feel confident defending our favourite games of the year without having played the other ones up for awards. So with the Game Awards celebrating their 10th anniversary this year with the 11th show, I thought it would be interesting to go back and play every winner of Game of the Year and see, based on the first couple hours of gameplay, whether they deserve the praise. It's not a perfect science, I know, but it should be a fun one. Obviously I won't be spoiling much of anything since I'll only be playing so little of each game, but if you don't want to know anything about these games at all, then I guess steer clear. Let's jump right into it. As this game is naturally the oldest on this list, I should have expected it to show its age, but I was not expecting this game to be so rough in so many aspects. I'll come right out and say that this type of game is not at all my thing, but even beyond that, this game is probably the worst performance out of every game on this list. To be fair, some of these games have been graced with new gen upgrades, but hey, I don't want to blame the game itself too much. 2014 was still the borderline between two generations of console, and this is the only game out of all 10 Game of the Year winners that was on a 7th generation console, so a little leeway is in order, but I'm still going to point it out. At the start of the game there's a big explosion. I create my character, I chose Archer and the species Quinari, since being a regular human or dwarf sounded kind of boring. I gave myself a big ass forehead and away we go. The story setup is somewhat interesting. My character was present when a giant rift opened up which allowed monsters of various types to come through. Somehow my character gains the ability to sync with these rifts and control them to a degree, so our first job is to trek back up the mountain with a new crew of fighters to close the big rift to save everyone. This is where me only playing a couple hours of each game is going to sting some of my audience, because I did not like this game at all. The combat is some of the most boring I've ever played in a game before. As it stands, all I do is hold R2 and occasionally press square for a special attack. It aims automatically and there's not a ton of variation in positioning. Enemies have too much health, which means they only end up spawning a small handful of them at any given time, whereas I would have preferred more enemies but with less health. That way I could actually keep moving around as I change targets more often. It would actually make my special attacks feel like they had a lot more impact as well. The other special attack I have is to make myself invisible, which doesn't really help me at all at the current time. I don't know whether I'm able to learn stealth attacks or whether repositioning will become more important as I play on, but all it allows me to do is like walk around enemies and I guess attack them from behind. Again, I need to preface, this isn't my typical type of game, so if you're down there in the comments pleading and saying this game just isn't for me and I shouldn't be playing it, you'd be totally right. But since I'm not just going to skip over a game on this list because it occupies a genre I don't typically like, I'm just going to have to be brutally honest with what I think of certain games. And looking at the other nominees, it doesn't look like a particularly competitive year. I haven't played any of these games, but I feel like I can pretty safely say that both Dark Souls 2 and Bayonetta 2 look like leagues more fun than Dragon Age, but I suppose the masses disagreed at the time. Oh well, you win some, you lose some, I guess. On to the next game. Unlike the previous game, this one was the one I was most intrigued to play, and luckily it's a lot more like the type of games I'm used to playing. 2015 housed such titles as Bloodborne, Fallout 4, Metal Gear Solid 5, and Super Mario Maker. All of these games are close to, if not the peak of their respective franchise/genre, The Witcher 3 narrowly beating them all out, but I can honestly see why. 10 minutes into playing this game and I was already sucked into the lore surrounding the world. The way they explain the introduction to magic to a largely mundane world, to what being a Witcher entails. Plus, casting spells from a weapon wheel is giving me some major medieval GTA vibes, which I promise is a massive compliment. This game is touted as being one of the reasons developers started to treat their side missions with a little more respect, trying to run parallel in quality to the main missions as best they could, which, when you think about it, should have always been the case. Side missions are supposed to be shorter, self-contained stories, but there's nothing in that description that says they have to be vapid and missing substance like tons of games seem to think. I got to complete a couple of them on my journey just because because it felt right and because I wanted to. Geralt also feels like a really good protagonist to follow along with. He's sarcastic and slightly reckless, while also being highly attentive and skilled. This balance allows him to be vicariously played through by players, as you can believe either way when you're given the choice between drastically different dialogue options. I feel some games will have the right dialogue choice and then the piss off dialogue choice, where only one feels like it's actually in character. This has so far not been the case in this game. The best thing I can compare The Witcher 3 to is surprisingly Ghost of Tsushima. This may have to do with the controls, as well as how the Witcher spells kind of feel like stance changes. Look, you may think it's a loose connection, but that's just what I was thinking at the time. My first boss I was able to slay was this wild griffin, and I'm not so great at the combat just yet, but I'll get there, so if it wasn't obvious, this is a game I will continue. It's been on my radar for a while now, and with The Witcher 4 just announced to be in full development, I think it shall be something I complete at some point over the next few years. Let's just hope CD Projekt Red's next game doesn't suffer the launch curse of their most recent one. In 2016, the nominees were Inside, Titanfall 2, Doom, Uncharted 4 A Thief's End, and the winner, Overwatch. Now, I do remember how big of a deal Overwatch was at the time, so I get it from a certain perspective. But even if I wanted to play it for this video, there is currently no way for me to download Overwatch. The first game, that is. Yeah, when Overwatch 2 released, it basically stepped in front of the first game as its permanent replacement, and the response from fans was less than desired. Most things were arguably worse, more predatory. The whole thing just stunk of corporate greed. So, will I play Overwatch 2 in its place? No, I won't. I refuse to. Instead, I'll play what should have won in 2016. I promise you, this will be the only controversial thing I do in this video, unless you're a fan of Dragon Age Inquisition. I know that's something I can't promise everyone, but I just did, so get over it. Uncharted 4 was the PS4 game people were waiting for, and while some people think that graphically, fidelity is as simple as adding 50 million gigaflops to your PlayStation, Naughty Dog knew that taking advantage and understanding that power was the real trick if you wanted to push the envelope. Now, while other games on this list do try and flex a bit of their set-piece prowess early in the game, I mean, Uncharted itself is used to doing this. Uncharted 4, for the most part, actually takes it rather slow. It starts with you boating towards an island with a little bit of gun action, and quickly sends you into a couple of flashback scenes where we get to spend some time with Nathan's brother Sam, before he's killed off to make sure Uncharted 1 makes sense. There's virtually no cover shooting until we get to the prison breakout chapter. And yes, I'm not counting the little shootout you have in Drake's attic. No matter how realistic that target of Lazarevich looks, we do get to play a bit of Crash Bandicoot, which, if you know me, is some easy points in my book. Though you know it was giving some people some not so friendly flashbacks.
No, it doesn't matter. We're gonna take the high road.
The high road?
Instead of being action-focused, Uncharted 4 instead relies on its strong narrative to invest players. This is a risky thing to do for a new IP, but if we're going to assume most, if not all players have already played the trilogy before this one, I think it's a very effective use of its time. Of course, it does pick up eventually in the aforementioned prison breakout chapter, and from then it rarely lets up, but when it does, you know it's for some good old story. This is a game I have played before, so look out for my bias when I say I'd absolutely continue playing after the first couple hours. I think a lot of people will look back and be a little disheartened to see Overwatch taking up a Game of the Year spot, after all the good grace Blizzard has squandered squeezing their employees and customers of everything they're worth. But at least you can rest easy knowing that DaAcorn gave this spot to the right game. Again, I promise, just this one controversial take. Zelda has been a part of my life since forever, and I use those words carefully, because it wasn't until 2019's remake of Link's Awakening that I'd actually finished a Zelda game. But I'd played plenty of Zelda here and there in my youth, Ocarina of Time being my first, and of course Breath of the Wild was one I eventually came around to. Alongside PUBG, Horizon Zero Dawn, Persona 5, and Super Mario Odyssey, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild felt like the true frontrunner out of this entire group. Sure, some may say Persona 5 or even Odyssey had fair shakes at top dog, but Breath of the Wild winning doesn't just feel like the story of redefining Zelda, but of Nintendo themselves. You gotta remember, this was directly after launching the Switch, a console poised to rid them of the bad reputation they'd accrued from the Wii U era. So does Breath of the Wild have an amazing intro? Yes and no. I'll explain why in a second. Nintendo are masters at designing their games so the tutorials come naturally through gameplay. Learning is about trying, and if you try everything, you'll learn everything. And that's still true with Breath of the Wild, but to a pretty drastic degree. The Great Plateau is a massive area that serves as the tutorial for the game. It's a fraction of the entire map, but can still overwhelm new players that aren't sure where to go, or if they know where to go, how to get there. The first time I booted this game up in 2018, I quit halfway through the plateau. I can't even remember why. Something about it wasn't grabbing me immediately. But hey, maybe that's just my impatient brain unable to allow the game to explain things to me. Let's just try again next year. That time I finished the plateau, but got kinda lost exploring the fields of Hyrule. One thing led to another, and I quit again. There was something about the level of freedom it gives you that was unsettling at first. I can't even explain in words what it was that convinced me, but the third time I jumped into this game to give it a red hot go, something clicked. After blitzing through the plateau for the third time and heading straight to one of the 4 main missions of the game, my goals became clear. I'd learned everything I needed to finally appreciate what Breath of the Wild was, and looking back in retrospect, I begin to realize just how well the plateau was designed as the first area of the game. Of course, it isn't perfect, otherwise I never would have fallen off the game twice, but if you can keep an open mind and deliberately pay attention to everything this area has to offer, it'll position you greatly to appreciate the full game. At first, I'd go up to a Bokoblin camp, take them all out, steal their weapons, only to ask myself, why did I do that? And while back then I couldn't muster up an answer, nowadays I can safely say, it was for fun, you idiot. Sure, you do have those divine beasts to eventually go after, but the main mission of the game is to beat Ganon, and that's all about just getting stronger. And to do that, you need to scour the lands in search of treasures to plunder and enemies to kill. This whole time when you think you're doing what you want for the sake of fun, you're also fulfilling the very mission of the entire game. And the Great Plateau has subtly taught you everything you need to know to get everything you can out of it. As another game I have finished, Breath of the Wild does in fact get my continued tick, with the side note of pleading that anyone not quite into it right now, to give it just that little extra bit of time. Alongside Celeste, Monster Hunter World, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Marvel's Spider-Man, and Red Dead Redemption 2, this year's winner God of War was in the company of some incredibly amazing games. I don't know what Assassin's Creed Odyssey was doing there, I guess they had a free spot. Anyway, joking aside, this year was packed, but the discourse online would have you know that it was really only between Red Dead 2 and God of War. I still see comments to this day complaining about how Red Dead 2 didn't win, and to be honest, they might be right. I haven't played that game yet, but the game I have played is God of War, and shit yes, it deserves its spot there. The first couple hours are basically an expanded version of what we saw all those years ago at PlayStation's E3 2016 presentation. We learn how to fight, how to traverse the land, and how to use our son Atreus as a mobile drone capable of shooting arrows. It doesn't quite drop us in the deep end of the light RPG elements this game has, only really giving us an upgrade to the axe, as well as a light and heavy runic attack to give us some flavour while fighting. But the real takeaway from the intro is the fight with the stranger. This fight is such a strong introduction into this new era of Kratos. A boss at this scale happening so early into the game as well really does set the stage for an epic adventure. The fight is aggressive, but not so hard it knocks you around without you learning anything. Sadly, a couple hours in, we are met with one of the weaker points of the game, repeating mini-bosses. This game does not have the widest array of enemies, and with the mini-bosses, it's even more apparent. These trolls are littered throughout the game, even more so within the main story, masquerading as important figures like the one you fight in Helheim, while essentially being the same boss you fought before. I do have to say, by and large, this doesn't affect the entire game too badly. These mini-bosses are well designed and fun to fight. The repetitiveness of them just does become a little tiresome eventually. Luckily, the rest of the game most definitely makes up for it. This intro is one of the strongest on this entire list, and I'd even argue its sequel outdoes it. But we're not talking about that game now. God of War 2018 is a masterclass in setting the stage for your player, and it clearly had an effect on the gaming industry as a whole, as more and more AAA experiences are looking for that early source to pull you in and get you hooked. But most developers haven't quite figured it out quite like Santa Monica Studio has, so safe to say I'll definitely be giving this game the tick of continuing. I've never played a From Software game. I know, surprising I'm sure. The very idea of getting so frustrated at a game's difficulty that it actually keeps you playing sounds kind of annoying, but these same people love them all the same. So I knew eventually I'd be giving one a try, and in this video, as you may know, there are 2 of them. But let's focus on the winner of 2019's Game of the Year first. Alongside games such as Control, Death Stranding, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, The Outer Worlds, and Resident Evil 2, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is the samurai fantasy game that I bet Sucker Punch was a little ticked predated them by only a single year. Once again, this is a game that I'll be playing for the first time, so the first couple of hours will be the deciding factor on whether I continue or not. So hopefully I won't die too many times as I play. Okay, so this is a bit hard. First thing I noticed about this game is that enemies are relentless. If you are considered visible to them, rest in peace to you, my brother, because they are coming for you. And early on, before I had my sword, I was kind of a sitting duck, but we got out of there and battled the first boss. Am I really that bad? Once we lose our arm and are killed, our enemies will learn that we are a shadow, and because of that, we die 2 times. Second time, or something. Some way, somehow, we have developed the power to resurrect, if we have the charge to do so. We also get given a prosthetic arm, which comes with a grappling hook built in standard. It kinda works like web zipping in Spider-Man, except the spots in which you can grapple to are limited. You attack with R1 and block with L1, and for the amount that I played, this is really all I had for combat potential, but I made good use of it, slicing my way through the basic enemies until getting to this handsome fella. Okay, that's the last time I compliment an ogre. The learning curve was definitely something I had to adjust to. There's an extra violent nature to the enemies, and this guy is no exception. And I practically have to kill him twice. Well, after a bit of training, I was able to defeat him, only to discover a remnant that revealed to me that you can stealth kill one of these red orbs from the ogre. It would have been nice to know. A remnant is an echo another player can leave behind of themselves, that can show secrets or just lead the player in the correct path. Some of them, though, are a little bit more entertaining than helpful. I spent far too much time trying to kill this hunk before deciding I'd just skip him altogether, only to be met with the World Serpent from last year's Game of the Year win of God of War? This guy kinda gave me issues. The camera isn't so great when you're trying to platform downward, so I kept on having to tilt its stubborn ass upward so I could actually see what I was doing, while running away from this gigantic serpent. Maybe if I hide here, I can wait until it leaves. Holy shit, I killed it? Okay, well, time to go. After managing to upgrade a couple of my items, as well as learn a new move, I arrived at this guy's domain, and I don't even know where to start with this dude. I can grapple towards him, but his spear swinging is far too fast for me to do anything about. And my time's up. So, would I continue playing this game? Well, how else am I gonna learn how to kill this dude? So yes, I kind of do get the appeal. Even though I think there are some areas in this game that do show cracks, it was fun to overcome some of those harder enemies in the intro. Plus, I'm a big fan of the giant chickens. 2020 was another incredibly strong year for the Game Awards. The nominees included Doom Eternal, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Hades, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Ghost of Tsushima, with the win going to the somewhat controversial The Last of Us Part 2. Now, before we get started on this can of worms, my personal game of the year for this year was Ghost of Tsushima. For me, it was a new experience with new characters and a new world that did almost everything right and sucked me in at every turn. But I do understand why The Last of Us 2 won. I know I promised only one controversial take in this video, but what can I say? Something about Naughty Dog just makes me root for them every time. So no, I am not a hater of this game. In fact, I'm quite a big supporter, and in the first 2 hours of the game, we become reacquainted with the typical Last of Us gameplay, as well as learning a few new tricks this game has in store, like my personal favourite move, going prone. Okay, it might not look impressive, but yeah, alright, it's hard to defend this unless you've actually played it. I think even most of the people who hate this game with a burning passion can still attest to the sheer quality of it, especially the graphics. It may not be the biggest jump from Uncharted 4, but it's still a jump. The aspect of this game that really rubs people the wrong way is the direction the story takes. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't played this game. Again, I'm only talking about the first couple hours, but still, it's a pretty big shift, so I think it's well worth warning you again all the same. So after an entire game of developing his character, Part 2 decided to kill Joel. It's a bold move for sure, and one that'll either heavily invest the player in seeing the story to the end, or throw someone off so badly they can't help but give up on the entire playthrough. And look, I can understand both ways, but the way a lot of people on the hater side of the aisle behaved regarding the story makes it hard for anyone to discourse properly about the game's strong points as well as its flaws. It's not a perfect game. It still has some of those Naughty Dog-isms that have the whole thing lean more movie and less game, which I've always been a little shaky to, but the reality is this game is a certified masterpiece. It's a shame some of its biggest plot points were spread around the internet entire months before it was released, because the internet was able to take those leaks and construct a narrative that did not do the game any favors. While I personally would continue beyond the first 2 hours any day of the week, as I've already finished the game a couple of times, for you, it will depend on how Joel's death affects your resilience to play. I mean, you should keep playing, because if you didn't know, Joel's not real. He's not your friend. He's not even that amazing of a guy. So if you do end up turning the game off at this point, that's okay. Take some time to grow up and maybe come back to it when you've developed slightly thicker skin for your fictional characters biting the dust. For anyone offended at my take, that's cool. Argue it out in the comments. Apart from Overwatch, which I graciously declined to play, It Takes Two, developed by Hazelight, is the only game on this list that isn't a predominantly single-player game. The FromSoft games obviously have some online features, but It Takes Two is strictly a two-player story-based experience. This year's other nominees included Resident Evil Village, Psychonauts 2, Deathloop, Metroid Dread, and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. And while my personal favourite of this year was the new Ratchet & Clank, I cannot deny that It Takes Two deserved its recognition, especially since director Joseph Fares is quite literally passion incarnate. He has a pretty funny history with the Game Awards itself as well, being one of their most vocal supporters, even if Jeff didn't look like he totally enjoyed the loud mouthery from Joseph. But the dude is talented. From Brothers to A Way Out, he and his team have been desperately trying to perfect the co-op experience for years, and I think that with It Takes Two, they've done it. This is another game that I have played to completion, as I downloaded it almost directly after that year's Game Awards. In just the first couple hours, we get to become accustomed to the fairly smooth platforming controls, as well as trying out two of the many powers we get to use in the game. I say two, but I guess it's technically four, since each player gets their own power. The nail kind of works like the Leviathan axe from God of War, while the hammer is able to smash glass or buttons. Together, however, they can be used to bridge gaps to swing over. Every power is created to be used individually and cooperatively, and the game does not spend more time than it needs to on each of them. Just as you've become accustomed to having a certain ability, you're off to using a new one you'll learn to love. This isn't even mentioning the story. We only begin to scratch the surface in the first couple hours I played for the video, but it does start off incredibly strong, promising an emotional journey of two attempted divorcees as they are forced to work together to reverse the doll curse that has been unknowingly thrust upon them by their daughter, who just wants to see her parents be friends again. I won't spoil how it all shakes up, but if you're someone who can't play this as you lack friends or family to play with, I gotta say, you're missing out, and I'd recommend getting a friend even if it is just to experience this game in its entirety. You don't even have to be in the same room, as you can play it with anyone online, as long as they have the access to their online features. In a twist I didn't see coming from EA of all companies, only one of you actually needs to own the game, as the other player can download a friend pass for free. It's a strange move that has been seeing some adoption from other studios. I only call it strange because of how consumer friendly it is, which as we all know isn't quite the industry's strong suit. Anyway, It Takes Two gets a tick, as I absolutely would continue the game based on its first couple hours. Just make sure you get someone who's marginally good at platforming to join you. With this game winning, it marks the first time a developer has won 2 Game of the Year awards at specifically these Game Awards. And as you may know, FromSoft is coming back for a third. While I'd describe Sekiro as almost a rhythm combat experience, Elden Ring plays more like a traditional From Software game, with the 4 giant equipable slots to the all-famous dodge roll mechanic. And unlike their previous game, where there was a slight linearity to where you should go, Elden Ring plops you in the middle of nowhere and basically tells you to go off. And I need you guys to bear with me as I explain my thoughts as I played the game for close to 3 hours, because the first hour, I'm sorry to say, kinda sucked. It really did not bode well when I spent the first hour just trying to look for things I could actually manage to kill. I did manage to kill this thing lurking in a cave, and that was probably my first true win of the game, and gave me a little fuel to keep going. Having no idea what to do, I ended up following these points of lost grace, which seemed to be the campfire equivalent in this game. These spots sometimes point you in a direction, and with nothing else to go off, I felt like this was the only way I was going to get anywhere, until this giant dropped from the sky and I realized I was probably going a little further than I was ready for. Oh my god. Eventually I reached this lovely creature, Margit the Fell Omen. It was a bit much for me. This was at the point where I needed some guidance on what to do, so talking to a friend of mine, I discovered I needed to earn the ability to level up by sitting at a specific Lost Grace spot that I had somehow missed. That was a vital gameplay mechanic that was hidden from me. And you can sit there and say you found it on your first go around, or that it's not that bad of a thing, but I was playing for an entire hour without having the ability to level up. Am I the only one that sees how crazy that is? But after that, I got to work. I trained on a ton of soldiers just outside, before finally promoting myself to Giant Control. Until I'd leveled up to the age where my character can drink, it was time to go back to good old Margit and showed them what I'd been building towards. Remembering to summon a helper with this easy to miss golden lettering on the ground, it was time to fight. Okay, so I didn't quite manage to beat it, but hey, I got pretty close. So Elden Ring. Would I continue it? Yes I can, and I will. This once again goes to show that sometimes it can be a little more complicated than playing half an hour of a game before deciding to drop it, because if I had done that with Elden Ring, I would have fallen off ages ago. These games are not beginner friendly, and I know some of you will say that's the point, or that you like that, but in my opinion, there needs to be something to convince me the game is at least going to be fun. Otherwise, I'd be stuck feeling like I'm doing a bunch of busy work for no reason. And this has nothing to do with the game being hard as well. I was prepared for that. But a game can't just hide core mechanics and call it a skill issue when you miss them. Imagine if Breath of the Wild required you to see Impa to start the 4 Divine Beast quests, but also didn't tell you where she was, or even that she existed. Sure, the game is designed in such a way to usher you towards Kakariko if you start going northeast, but it is equally as easy to jump south or somewhere west to start your journey that way. At least the game is smart enough to ditch a leveling system in favor of upgrading your weapons slowly by defeating more enemies. So yes, Elden Ring got much better around the 2-hour mark, so I will continue it. But developers, can we try and communicate better at the start of games from now on? Thank you. Now for last year's Game Awards, the 10th and final one to cover on this list. This year had some pretty tough competition. Alan Wake 2, Resident Evil 4, Spider-Man 2, and Super Mario Wonder, but the two frontrunners were clearly Tears of the Kingdom and Baldur's Gate 3. My personal choice was Zelda. Having played only half of the nominees, I was never going to have a fully informed opinion, and after playing a bit of Baldur's Gate 3, Zelda is still my favourite of 2023. But I came out liking it a lot more than I expected. Being a game version of a tabletop RPG, it is far from what I would call my typical game type, but it does do some things that have it stand out from some of the other games I've complained about. For starters, its intro is a whole lot better. The tutorial is rather simple, and I think it gives you everything you need for a foundation of gameplay knowledge that you can lean on as you learn more and more the further you play. But before all that, I spent a good half an hour in the character creator, making what I can only describe as a paler, purple-haired version of Prince Charming from Shrek. Our tutorial takes place on an alien ship, where I guess we've been abducted and probed with some alien parasite that seems to now be crawling around in my brain matter. Excellent picture. Moving on. We crawl through the ship, meeting a couple of companions, as we fight our way to escape, only for a dragon to come and kinda do the job for us, while we narrowly escape into hyperspeed and crash land on a beach. We go around killing and looting whoever as we meet a couple more of our party members, and that is one major difference between this game and something like Dragon Age. For me personally, I couldn't give two shits about anyone at the start of Dragon Age. Their character archetypes are spelt out pretty plainly, sure, but they're also boring. These guys, on the other hand, are a lot more fun, especially Astarion, who of course I knew going in was a fan favourite. They're just all quirky and full of life. Actually spending time with them in your camp brings forth some pretty funny moments, like deciding to allow Astarion to bite you for blood. I've been told that a lot of these choices that I make in-game will begin to have ripple effects the longer I play. Of course, I don't really have the game time to corroborate that, so I'm just gonna have to take people's word for it. Combat starts off fairly simple, but when you start actually using the spells you have at your disposal, you realise how dense the systems can become, especially after rescuing the wizard Gale, who has quite a few different spells to use. It can be slow and sometimes tedious, but every addition to your arsenal also adds a little bit of fun. So even though I've really only scratched the surface of this game, it's absolutely one I will keep playing once I find the time. It's a big game and one I'd prefer to really sink my teeth into and go full throttle. Despite it not being a game belonging to my genre of choice, I believe it breaks some of those boundaries that manage to make it fun for me, and I'm excited to see how intricate my individual journey can become despite that. And now we arrive at the 11th installment in the Game Awards saga. This year the nominees are Astrobot, Balatro, Black Myth Wukong, Shadow of the Erdtree, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Metaphor ReFantazio. And while I do have my favourites from this list that I wish could win, as well as one I really hope doesn't, my personal prediction is that Metaphor will take home the big one. If there's one thing I've learnt while playing all these games, is that if your game is based in medieval adjacent fantasy, you've got a pretty good chance at winning. I mean, 7 out of the 10 games on this list could arguably be accurately described as fantasy based, so I suppose we know the favourite aesthetic of these award shows. But either way, at the end of the day, these awards don't matter. It can be fun to try games you'd never try otherwise, just to see what all the fuss is about. Sometimes you'll be disappointed and hate what you're playing, but sometimes you'll discover a love for a game that rests dormant, waiting for you to just give it a chance. And that's what I intend to do from now on, because for every dragon-ass Inquisition game, there is a Witcher 3, or an Elden Ring. Yes, I've already gone back to playing Elden Ring, and I do not need to hear anyone tell me that they told me so. I'll be hearing enough of that from my friend for weeks. Until next time, don't judge a book by its cover, unless that cover has the EA logo on it.